Hello, my name is Anne Parker and I'm from the Foundation Years Trust, and I'm here today to give you your 5-minute early years briefing. Today's topic is attachment. Now, these briefings aren't really designed to give you anything new, so any new information. They are designed to help you think about and reflect upon your current practice and maybe think about what you might want to do differently. So here we go, attachment. So this briefing has been recorded during the COVID-19 pandemic, so it does have some bearing on attachment. However, I think most of what we're talking about today will have bearing on everyday practice. So John Bowlby described attachment as a lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. So we know that babies are born with a desire to attach to other human beings. They look for faces. They respond to mum's voice, they respond to sounds that they're familiar with from the uterus. So there's that desire straight away to connect, and it's what human adults do then that make the difference. So we know that children need this connectedness in order to form their brain structure properly, and also then to go on to learn and to be functioning human beings. Okay, so let's begin by thinking about brain development. So we know that babies are born with that desire to connect. They are looking for faces, they're listening out for voices, they respond to sounds that they recognise from being in the uterus. So we know that babies are kind of what we refer to as social beings. They want to connect. So their brains are already more or less formed in terms of all their neurons. They have all the neurons that they'll probably need for the rest of their life. And during those first few years of life, 1 million connections are being made between those neurons every second, which is kind of emphasises how crucial our role is. So those connections begin every time we touch or sing to a baby, every time they respond to something. Those connections are being strengthened, and as we repeat those activities, then those connections strengthen even more. But it's the response of adults that really makes the difference. So as we respond appropriately and lovingly, then those connections become really strong and permanent, really. And we call that a serve and return. So baby makes a sound and gurgles, we respond to the baby appropriately, the baby responds back to us, and that's what we call serve and return. It's really crucial for a child's development and for their ability to connect with adults. Just a very quick one on stress. Stress is an absolutely normal part of life, and babies will feel stress. However, babies who are in a stressful position for a long period of time, or for that extreme stress, then we call that toxic stress, and that's really damaging to those connections. Those connections actually begin to break up and fall apart. And so stress, long-term stress, will damage children's brain connections. We really need to be careful of that. We need to be responding in a loving, appropriate, loving and consistent manner with children to help those neural connections develop. So I'd like you to think about two hormones that are really key to this process. So there's oxytocin and there's cortisol. So oxytocin is what we refer to as the love hormone, and that's the hormone that increases when we're cuddled, when we're kissed, when we feel loved. Touch really supports that oxytocin for most of us. For babies, when they hear mum's voice perhaps in the distance singing in the kitchen, their oxytocin levels will increase. Cortisol is a really important hormone because that helps to save our lives. So when we're in that stress situation, cortisol floods our brains and stops the thinking part continuing, so that we're not thinking about what our shopping list is when we've got something that's life-threatening happening. It shuts all that off and puts us into that state where we can just survive, basically. So it's a really important hormone, but we don't want it flooding the brain for longer than is necessary, because while that has cut off the thinking part of the brain, clearly we can't, and children certainly can't, think, learn or concentrate. So we need to learn to use that cortisol when we need to, and then bring it back down to a normal level. So if we think now about that brain development, those neural connections, stress, and the impact of stress on children's development, what should we be doing in the settings to encourage that attachment? Well, I suppose my analogy is to think about Granny. So a child might see Granny once a week, and yet Granny will have a beautiful attachment with that child. So what is it that Granny's doing that helps that attachment develop? Well, in my opinion, she is demonstrating with her facial expressions, with her body language, with the tone of her voice, her eyes, everything expressing that moment, that child is the one and only person that she wants to be with at that moment. And I think, you know, that kind of sums up what we would need to be doing in a setting to support that attachment. Now, clearly, we might also want to hug and kiss and hold a child and touch them and stroke the hand and stroke the hair, and that might be possible. But in times where it isn't, we definitely have our tone of voice, our facial expressions, and our body language to demonstrate to that child that you are the one person that I want to spend my time with at this moment. So when we think about Granny and the child, the Granny might come in and, you know, oh, my lovely, I haven't seen you all week, and child will respond with glee probably and run over for a hug, or you know, kind of you know, demonstrate that they're really happy to see Granny as well. Granny then responds back because they're pleased that the child wants to see them. That's what we call a serve and return. It's reciprocity, and that's really what we were talking about before, about that importance of developing that attachment. We need that serve and return. But the other people who need that serve and return are parents. And we really need to acknowledge parents as key to this process. So they will have formed a type of attachment with their child, and we might feel that that might not be the best attachment, but nevertheless that might be the best attachment that that parent can form with that child at that time. But when they're handing their child over to you, they need that reassurance that you are going to hold that child in terms of that child, as you know, you want that relationship to reform, and that you're really concerned about that child, and that you know that child. So at the end of the day, supporting parent with something that the child has done, sharing some information about what's happened in nursery, something really personal about that child will really help parents feel that you're there for them, you're connecting with them, and you know that child. So the simplest way to describe this really is about tuning in. So we need to be tuning into children through observing them, so through listening to their tone of voice. That often gives us clues as to how they're feeling. Supporting children to manage their own emotions, so describing and labelling what you think they might be experiencing at that moment. Now, you know, we don't always have to get it right. And in fact, we probably sometimes get it wrong, and parents do too. And that's part of the process of developing that relationship together. So you might get it wrong, and then you have to repair that relationship again. So when we're cross with each other, for instance, we don't stay cross forever. You can model to the child how to repair that relationship and how to come back together again and reduce that cortisol and have that oxytocin flowing again. So that stress again doesn't last, you know, as more than it needs to last, really. Okay, so that's our whistle stop tour of attachment. I hope you found that useful. Please follow more of our 5-minute briefings and find us on our social media. Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye now.